It was Christmas Eve. Snow fell gently on the city. People laughed. They carried shopping bags. Families walked close together. The streetlights were bright and beautiful. Everyone seemed happy. But Juan felt very sad. He was a giant man. He had broad shoulders. He had a massive body. But his heart was completely empty. His parents died a long time ago. He lived all alone. He wanted someone to love. He wanted a real home. Juan walked toward the subway. He wanted to escape the happy crowds. Then, he saw an old man. The old man wore a dirty Santa suit. He sat on the cold, icy ground. He held a small cardboard sign. The sign said, "Tell Santa your wish." Juan felt sorry for the old man. He stopped walking. He bought a carton of milk. He took some money from his pocket. He placed them gently on the sign. "Merry Christmas," Juan said. Suddenly, the old man grabbed Juan's hand. His grip was incredibly strong. Juan was shocked. He could not move his arm. "You are a truly good person," the old man said. "I must reward you. Tell me your wish." Juan was a little scared. He tried to pull his hand away. But the old man held tight. The old man looked desperate. Juan gave up. He sighed. He decided to tell the truth. "I want a family," Juan said softly. "I want a home that will never leave me. I want a wife as gentle as a rabbit. I want a daughter as cute as a squirrel." The old man smiled. It was a creepy smile. His eyes turned a glowing, scary red. "It is done," the old man whispered. "A pure wife and a sweet daughter are yours." Juan finally yanked his hand away. He ran into the subway station. He thought the old man was just crazy. Juan got on the empty train. He sat down. He closed his eyes. The train hummed quietly. Juan fell into a deep sleep. Juan woke up. He felt a freezing chill. The train was gone. The city was gone. He looked around in panic. He was inside a rusty iron cage. He had no clothes on. Heavy metal chains locked his feet. A dead man sat next to him. The dead man wore dirty rags. Outside the cage, a horse pulled the cart. Guards walked next to the cart. They wore old, metal armor. They spoke a strange, ugly language. Juan did not understand a single word. He realized the terrible truth. He was not on Earth anymore. He was in a different world. He was a slave. Weeks passed slowly. The cart traveled far across the land. The weather was freezing. Juan was starving. The guards stopped at different villages. They sold slaves to the local people. People bought the strong and healthy slaves. But no one bought Juan. He looked too weak. He looked too broken. Juan lost all hope. He felt totally alone in this cruel place. Why should he keep living? This new world was pure hell. He looked at the dirty floor of the cage. He saw a rusty metal fork. Juan picked up the fork. He held it tight in his big hand. He decided to end his life. Death would stop the cold. Death would stop the pain. He pressed the sharp fork to his neck. He closed his eyes. He got ready to push. Then he heard a soft voice. He opened his eyes. A woman stood outside the iron bars. She was beautiful. She had a kind, warm smile. A little girl hid behind the woman's dress. The girl had big, cute eyes. She had messy blonde hair. She looked just like a small squirrel. The woman reached into the cage. Her hand shook with fear. She gave Juan a piece of crusty bread. Juan stared at them. He felt a warm spark in his cold heart. He dropped the fork. It hit the floor with a loud clang. The heavy wooden cart finally stopped in front of a small, cozy cabin hidden deep in a quiet forest. For Juan, everything changed the moment he stepped inside. It was nothing like his cold, rusty iron cage. The air was warm, smelling of burning wood and fresh food. At a simple wooden table sat a beautiful woman and a little girl with messy blonde hair. The soft light from the fireplace glowed on their faces as they ate. The little girl slurped her hot soup with so much joy that the whole room felt bright and happy. Juan stood quietly and watched them. The woman was as gentle as a rabbit, and the girl was as cute as a tiny squirrel. Suddenly, it all made sense. The crazy old Santa Claus he had met back in the city had not lied. The old man's promise was coming true. Juan's reward had finally begun. As they ate, Juan watched a beautiful moment unfold. The mother gently pushed her own bowl toward her daughter, claiming she wasn't hungry. But the little girl was smart. She knew they were both starving. She took her spoon and carefully poured exactly half of her soup back into her mother's bowl. A look of deep, pure love washed over the mother's tired face as they smiled and finished their meal together. However, this happy home held a dark and painful history. Just a few days earlier, their peace was shattered. The cruel village chief had kicked open their door. He told the terrified mother, Rigi, that the village leaders had made a decision. Her abusive husband had recently been killed by wild wolves. Now, a cart full of slaves had arrived, and she was forced to take one as her new husband. Rigi had felt like her world was ending. Her first husband had beaten her terribly. Her only light in the dark was 5-year-old Dorothy, her dead husband's daughter. Rigi loved the child deeply and swore to protect her. The thought of another violent man entering their lives filled her with dread. The next morning, Rigi and Dorothy walked to the village gates to face their fate. On the dirt road, they saw a large wooden cart carrying a heavy iron cage. Inside sat a massive man hiding in the shadows. It was Juan. Rigi froze. She noticed the hollow, desperate look in his eyes. He was holding a sharp metal fork to his own neck, ready to end his life. The mean village chief walked up and began insulting Rigi. Despite her fear, Rigi felt a deep pity for the desperate man in the cage. She knew what it felt like to want to die. Reaching into her basket, she bravely handed a piece of fresh bread through the cold iron bars. That small, warm act of kindness changed everything for Juan. The pure innocence of the child and the gentle care of the woman pushed away his dark thoughts. He dropped the fork. He wanted to live. The chief angrily snatched the basket away and ordered Rigi to go home. Once she was gone, soldiers dragged Juan out of the cage. His bread fell into the mud. He was forced to his knees beside 2 other weak slaves. What happened next would haunt Juan forever. Without warning, the soldiers drew their swords and killed the other 2 slaves right there in the dirt. A soldier then dipped his fingers in their fresh blood and drew symbols on old paper scrolls. The bloody symbols instantly glowed with an eerie blue magic. Juan was frozen in terror, realizing he had been thrown into a cruel, magical world. Back at the cabin, an old woman from the village brought Rigi some supplies. She told Rigi that the new slave had soft hands, like a nobleman, meaning he might not be a violent brute. But Rigi just cried. She didn't care about a comfortable life. She only prayed for a man who would leave her and her daughter in peace. The next morning, violent pounding shook the cabin. Rigi pulled Dorothy close as the village chief kicked the door open. He dragged a massive, bleeding man into the room. It was Juan. Seeing this giant man hurt and treated like an animal, a rare spark of anger flashed in Rigi's timid heart. She yelled at the chief for being so cruel. Then she looked up and recognized Juan. He was the man she had given the bread to. Juan was just as shocked. Why was his saving angel shaking with fear? Impatient, the chief grabbed their hands. He forced Juan's huge, rough fingers to lace tightly with Rigi's small, shaking ones. "You are now husband and wife," the chief declared coldly, slamming the door as he left. Left alone in the quiet cabin, Juan gently squeezed Rigi's hand. He looked at his frightened new wife and the sweet little girl hiding behind a chair. His heart raced in his chest. The old man's magical promise was real. His new life had finally begun. Juan remembered the strange promise of the old Santa. The old man had promised him a pure-hearted wife and a sweet daughter. Now, looking at Rigi, Juan saw a gentle rabbit. Her little girl looked just like a tiny, wide-eyed squirrel. Juan could hardly believe it. Had that crazy old man actually granted his wish? But reality quickly brought a wave of anger. Sending him to a cruel, alien world felt like a sick joke. Why couldn't the gift be given gently? Instead, he had faced pain and humiliation. Juan lowered his head. Silent anger darkened his face. He ground his teeth. If he ever saw that Santa again, he would make him pay. His intense fury rolled off him like a wild bear. Instinctively, the mother and daughter shrank back in fear. After the awkward introduction, the village chief and some men took Juan into the woods. The chief yelled something in a harsh, strange language. Juan couldn't understand a single word. His head spun. Then, a blond man stepped up and offered his hand. Juan smiled and took it. Instantly, the man squeezed hard. It was a test of strength. The man's face twisted with effort. Juan frowned. He squeezed back just a little. Effortlessly, Juan lifted the young man clean off the ground. The man dangled in the air and screamed. The chief yelled in shock. The man's hand turned an angry red under Juan's grip. After Juan let go, the man fell to his knees, clutching his hand. The chief quickly changed his tune. He started waving his arms wildly. He handed Juan a bow and arrows. He even hopped around like a rabbit to explain. They wanted him to hunt. The chief pointed at the bushes and yelled. Juan saw a small white rabbit eating leaves. He had never used a bow before. Still, he took a firm stance and pulled the string. The arrow flew with terrifying speed. It hit the ground so hard the rabbit jumped and ran away. He had missed completely. Yet, the chief jumped for joy. Juan was totally confused. Why were they praising a missed shot? Just then, Juan saw Rigi and the little girl walking toward him. His heart raced. He realized this was truly his family now. A deep blush spread across his face. Everyone looked confused by the giant, shy man. Later, they shared a simple meal in the woods. Rigi made hot soup with vegetables and meat. Tension filled the air. When Juan picked up his spoon, the mother and daughter flinched. He stopped. His heart broke at their fear. Slowly, a warm smile spread across his face. It melted away his cold look. For years, he had been totally alone. Now, he had a family. The feeling was strange, but wonderful. He looked at the sky and smiled. The next day, they hiked to their mountain home. Juan carried the heavy bags easily, but he kept looking back. Rigi and the girl were exhausted. Juan couldn't speak their language to ask if they were okay. He remembered his mother's advice. When you want to protect someone, do not hesitate. Juan turned around and walked straight toward them. Rigi looked terrified. She begged for mercy with her hands. The little girl started to cry. Juan sighed. He knew his huge size scared them. He knelt down to look friendly. Softly, he spoke a single word to ask permission. Then, he gently reached out. With incredible ease, he lifted them both. Rigi sat on one broad shoulder. The little girl rested safely in his other arm. Rigi gasped in shock. He was as steady as a mountain. The little girl's tears turned into a happy gasp. Juan smiled. He promised himself he would learn their language. He would become a great hunter to feed them. Rigi nervously grabbed his shoulder. Juan covered her small hand with his big one. A silent bond formed. Their fear slowly melted away. They felt safe against his strong back. Juan carried them all the way up the mountain. They finally reached a small wooden cabin. The village chief waved goodbye and left them alone. Juan looked at his new home. It looked freezing. He remembered his bitter past and took a deep breath. He pushed the heavy wooden door open with hope. Suddenly, Rigi ran outside. Her face was red and tears streamed down her cheeks. Juan rushed to her, asking what was wrong. She stayed silent. Juan looked inside the cabin and his blood ran cold. The house was completely empty. Neighbors had stolen everything while they were away. The furniture, the shelves, and even the survival tools were gone. They had no way to fix the house. They had no weapons to fight wild animals. They were completely helpless. Juan found Rigi sitting in the cold shadows outside. She was shaking and crying in total despair. He sat down next to her. He kept a respectful distance, but shared the heavy silence. Gently, he reached out and stroked her hair. His touch was incredibly soft. Rigi stopped crying and looked at him with wide, glassy eyes. Juan gave her a small, warm smile. He wanted her to know everything would be okay. Rigi was still confused. They couldn't speak to each other. He didn't know how to hunt. How would they survive? But Juan looked deeply into her eyes. In a deep, strong voice, he promised to protect her. He gently held her cheeks in his large hands. It was a gesture of pure respect. A single tear rolled down Rigi's face. This time, it wasn't from fear. It was from the strange, warm trust growing in her heart. In the fading sunset, Rigi felt a rare sense of peace. Somehow, this giant stranger made her feel perfectly safe. Juan's mind drifted back to his old life. Since his parents died, he had been completely alone. He had always fought hard just to survive. Out of habit, he clenched his hand into a fist. It was a quiet reminder of his strength. But now, he finally had a real family. He had a true reason to stay strong. He pounded his chest in determination, silently promising to do whatever it took to provide for them. That silent vow broke Rigi. The emotional dam burst, and she began to cry heavily. Without saying a word, Juan gently pulled her close. He let her rest her head against his broad shoulder so she could release all her pain. Just then, the little girl saw them from a distance. She thought Juan was hurting her mother. In a flash of fierce anger, she charged toward them. She threw her tiny arms around Rigi from behind, yelling for the big man to leave her mother alone. In seconds, the three of them were tangled together. It was a clumsy, awkward hug, but it was their very first hug as a complete family. Holding the crying woman, Juan felt his heart swell with warmth. The little girl was crying now too. Many questions swirled in his mind. Where was the child's father? Why did this poor woman share her bread with him when she had nothing? What tragedies had caused her so much pain? Juan pushed those sad thoughts away. He hugged them both even tighter. He made a powerful promise to himself. He would make them the happiest people on earth. He vowed to be the best husband and father. He wanted them to never regret letting him into their family. Soon, the sun went down. Long, dark shadows covered their small wooden cabin. When they went back inside, they sat on the floor across from each other. An awkward silence filled the empty room. Juan thought the hug would bring them closer, but they still felt like strangers. Rigi felt the same way. This giant man was a mystery to her. They had to figure out how to live together, but they didn't even know where to begin. Suddenly, Juan had an idea. He snapped his fingers and leaned forward. He wanted to break the invisible wall between them. He pointed to his chest and spoke in a firm, clear voice. "Kim Juan," he said. He repeated it slowly. Kim Juan. He hoped they could at least learn his name. It worked. Rigi looked up in surprise and softly repeated the sounds. Juan smiled and held out his hand, silently asking for her name. She paused, then whispered, "Ri." She took a deep breath and said it clearer. "Rigi, Rigi," Juan said with a huge smile. What a beautiful name. Next, Juan turned to the little girl. He smiled sweetly and asked her name. The child hid her face against her mother's side. Juan looked into her big, innocent eyes and realized something sad. Maybe she did not have a name at all. A wave of pity washed over him. Without hesitation, he gently stroked her messy hair. He decided to give her a beautiful name. Dorothy, he said. He thought of the brave girl from The Wizard of Oz. She was a hero who went on a great adventure, found loyal friends, and fought for happiness. The little girl tried to say the word, Zezugrati, she babbled. Juan laughed softly. He explained that the name would bring her many friends and lots of love. She didn't understand the words, but she understood his kind tone. Her face lit up with a huge smile. She tried again and said it perfectly. Dorothy, with their names shared, their new life truly began. Juan went outside to work. He swung his axe into the wood with powerful, steady chops to fix the house. From a safe distance, Rigi watched him. He was much bigger and stronger than her late husband. Yet, he was incredibly gentle with her. She had never met a man like him. She softly whispered his name to herself. Juan, she had no idea where he came from, but saying his name felt warm and sweet. In her entire life, Rigi had never been treated with such kindness. She wondered why this giant man was so good to her. Suddenly, Juan stopped chopping wood. He turned around, smiled, and called her name. In that moment, she noticed his dark hair and dark eyes. This reminded her of a famous rumor. People said a faraway country had summoned a legendary hero with jet black hair and jet black eyes. Could this kind man be the legendary hero? As Juan walked closer, Rigi felt shy and confused. She looked up at his tall, strong body. Her heart fluttered with a mix of fear and hope. When she looked closer, she realized his hair was not jet black. It was dark brown, just like his eyes. Rigi let out a quiet sigh of relief. He was not a magical hero. He was just a normal man who was unusually strong. But why did she feel so happy and peaceful? They had only met today. Her face turned red with shy confusion. Suddenly, Juan reached out. He gently placed his large hand on her head and stroked her hair. Rigi froze. In her painful past, a man's raised hand always meant she was going to be hit. But Juan's hand just brushed through her hair. It was so gentle and warm. Instead of wanting to hide, she felt safe. She secretly wished he would never stop petting her hair. Seeing her relax, Juan gently pulled her a tiny bit closer. His own face started to turn red. Rigi looked so peaceful. Without warning, Juan slowly leaned forward and gently pressed his lips against hers. It was a sudden, sweet kiss. Rigi opened her eyes wide in shock, but she did not pull away. In that short moment, all her worries disappeared. All she felt was the pure sweetness of their first kiss. Then, Juan pulled back very fast. He looked completely shocked by his own actions. His face turned bright red. He stammered, but no words came out. He was incredibly embarrassed. The silence between them felt very heavy. Needing an excuse to run away, Juan grabbed a wooden water bucket. He held the handle tightly. Without saying a word, he turned around and sprinted toward the stream. He left Rigi standing there all alone. Her face was burning hot, and her heart was beating fast. She just stood there, happily thinking about the kiss. Meanwhile, Juan walked by the dark stream. He scolded himself out loud for moving too fast. He paced nervously, reminding himself that they were still strangers who could not speak the same language. The more he thought about it, the more panicked he became. He walked around in a fog of worry. Lost in his thoughts, Juan walked deep into the dark woods. Suddenly, a terrible chilling howl echoed through the trees. It broke the quiet night. Juan jumped. He told himself to focus, get the water, and go back to his family. But then, a cold shiver ran down his spine. Sweat dripped down his forehead. Out of the pitch-black bushes, a giant wolf slowly stepped forward. Its eyes glowed like burning red coals. It blocked Juan's path completely. The beast growled deeply and showed its sharp, terrifying teeth. This was a true monster of the night. Juan took a slow step backward. He stood perfectly still, gripping the wooden bucket tightly. He tried to stay calm, knowing the deadly beast was about to attack. Juan did not run away. He slowly put the wooden bucket down. He grabbed a heavy fallen log. It was a terrible weapon, but it was all he had. He gripped the rough wood tightly. He stared right into the giant wolf's glowing red eyes. He was ready to fight for his life. The beast jumped at him with terrifying speed. Juan swung the log hard. He blocked the wolf's deadly bite. The crash shook his bones. The wolf was incredibly strong and completely wild. It pushed forward and threw Juan backward. Juan flew through the air and hit a tree hard. His vision blurred, and he saw stars. Pain shot through his entire back. But Juan refused to die here. He let out a loud, angry roar. He charged right back at the terrifying wolf. He wanted to grab the monster by its throat. He squeezed his eyes shut. He put all his anger and all his will to survive into his hands. He had a family now, and he was not going to leave them. Suddenly, his arm began to burn. It felt like strange, hot energy was rushing through his veins. A sharp sound echoed in the dark woods. A bright golden light burst from his hand. Actual fire exploded from his palm. The wolf growled in fear. The magical flames wrapped around the giant beast. Juan was completely shocked, but he didn't stop fighting. He jumped onto the wolf's back. He pushed all of this new wild energy into his burning fist. He punched the beast as hard as he could. The fiery strike lit up the dark forest. The wolf collapsed immediately. It was dead in an instant. Even after the wolf stopped moving, Juan kept punching the air. His heart hammered in his chest. His body was running on pure adrenaline. Finally, he stopped. He fell onto the soft grass, breathing heavily. He looked at his hands in pure disbelief. He knew they had just been on fire. Yet, his skin was perfectly fine. His clothes were not burned at all. It was a complete mystery. Juan sat there, totally amazed. He had just used real magic. He remembered reading comic books and stories back home. In those stories, people who traveled to new worlds often got superpowers. Maybe he was like a hero in those stories now. He felt a sudden burst of hope. He pointed his hand at the dark sky. Fire, he yelled. Nothing happened. Only the cold wind blew through the trees. He tried again. His voice grew louder. Fireball, wall of flame, dragon's breath. He even tried waving his arms around. He felt a little silly. Nothing worked. The magic was gone. However, he knew it was not a dream. The pain in his back was completely gone. The magic had healed the bruises from hitting the tree. Juan looked up at the bright stars and smiled. If he could learn to control this fire magic, he could easily protect Reggie and Dorothy. He could hunt big animals to feed them. He could even heal them if they got sick. This power was an absolute miracle. Sitting in the quiet woods, old memories suddenly washed over him. After his parents died, only his grandfather had loved him. But then, his grandfather died in a sudden accident. Juan was left all alone with cruel relatives. He remembered his grandfather's funeral perfectly. An angry uncle had hit him hard. The uncle called Juan a curse. He screamed that Juan was the reason his parents and grandfather were dead. From that day on, everyone treated Juan like a monster. He was just a lonely high school student, but they hated him. Juan shook his head. He pushed those dark ghosts away. He was not a curse. He picked up the heavy dead wolf and put it on his broad shoulders. He remembered watching his grandfather prepare chickens on the old farm. If his grandfather could see him now, he would be so proud. Juan started walking back to the cabin. He just needed to figure out how to wake up his magic again. Back inside the warm cabin, Rigi and Dorothy were making dinner. Dorothy happily handed a wooden bowl to her mother. Rigi smiled and thanked her. Dorothy beamed. Her smile was as bright as the morning sun. She skipped around the glowing fireplace, feeling safe and happy. Then she heard a strange sound outside. Dorothy stood on her tiptoes. She looked out the dark window. Suddenly, a giant, scary wolf face appeared in the glass. Dorothy let out a terrifying scream. She fell backward onto the floor. Rigi's heart dropped. She yelled for her daughter. Rigi didn't freeze in fear. She grabbed a dull kitchen knife. It was her only weapon, but she didn't care. She ran to the door, pushing Dorothy behind her legs. She threw the heavy door open, ready to fight the monster for her child. The sight outside made Rigi freeze. She broke out in a cold sweat. Juan was kneeling on the ground. The giant wolf was draped over his shoulders. He looked incredibly tired. Rigi thought the beast was attacking him right then and there. She screamed his name in a complete panic. Juan looked up, completely confused by her screaming. Rigi raised her knife high. She was going to stab the beast to save her man. Then she stopped. She realized the wolf was not moving. It was already dead. Rigi dropped the knife. It hit the ground with a loud clatter. Her face turned bright red with intense embarrassment. She ran to Juan and threw her arms around him. She touched his face and arms, frantically looking for blood. Juan was surprised by her tight hug. He quickly told her he was okay. A second later, Dorothy ran out. She wrapped her little arms tightly around Juan's legs. She was crying very hard. Juan smiled softly. He knelt down to their level. He showed them a tiny scratch on his hand. He explained that it was just a very small bite. It didn't hurt at all. He gently rubbed their heads. He kept whispering that he was safe. Slowly, their breathing calmed down. Rigi hugged him tighter. She whispered words he didn't understand. It sounded like a quiet prayer of thanks to the sky. Dorothy sniffled against his leg. Juan held them both closely. He felt terrible for scaring them so badly. Later that night, Juan went to the wooden shed. He needed to skin the wolf. He used a sharp blade to cut the heavy hide. He moved like a professional. However, it was very hard work. He wiped sweat from his forehead. He realized he needed to find an easier way to do this next time. Still, he kept cutting. He wanted to make sure his family had plenty of meat. Suddenly, he heard a soft voice. It was Rigi. Juan turned around and smiled. She was standing in the doorway. She walked over and placed a large wooden bucket on the ground. She pointed to the clean meat and then to the bucket. She made funny cooking gestures with her hands. Juan finally understood. She wanted him to put the meat in the bucket so she could cook it. He nodded happily. Then, Juan realized something important. He wanted to thank her. He searched his memory for the words she had used earlier. He wanted to try speaking her language. His tongue felt thick and clumsy. "Go ama," he stuttered. Rigi's eyes went wide. Then, a beautiful radiant smile spread across her face. Juan panicked a little. Did he say the wrong word? Did he sound silly? Rigi stepped closer. She looked up into his dark eyes. She spoke very softly, gently correcting his pronunciation. "Goma," she whispered. They stood there in the quiet shed for a long time. They were standing very close to each other. The air felt warm and special. Juan smiled back at her. He tried again, speaking clearly this time. "Goma," Rigi blushed deeply. She smiled and shook her head, trying to tell him it was no problem. She felt so confused, but so incredibly happy. In her whole life, she had never known a man who said thank you. A simple thank you was something Ri had never heard from her own family. It was only a small gesture, yet it meant more to her than one could ever imagine. Since meeting him, she had experienced many things for the very first time. Suddenly, the memory of their first kiss flashed across her mind. Her cheeks instantly turned bright red. A wave of shyness, mixed with curiosity, rushed through her. She quickly turned away and hurried off, trying to hide her embarrassment. As she walked, one thought kept circling in her mind. Had he ever kissed another woman before? The question made her heart ache. She didn't understand why it bothered her so much, but the emotions became so overwhelming that she felt as though she might burst into tears. A little later, they returned to the shed to continue preparing the meat. Ri worked quietly, unable to stop thinking about Juan. In her village, processing meat was usually considered a woman's responsibility. Yet Juan handled the work naturally, as though it had never mattered to him whether a task belonged to a man or a woman. Why was he so different? She couldn't understand him. Even so, the two of them worked together surprisingly well. Without saying much, they moved in perfect rhythm, each naturally helping the other. As the silence stretched on, Ri found herself thinking once again about the strange feelings growing inside her. Is this really love? Without realizing it, she slowly closed her eyes. Juan noticed. Without hesitation, he stepped closer and gently kissed her forehead. The soft touch filled her heart with warmth. For a brief moment, she simply stood there, enjoying the feeling. Then, reality returned. Embarrassed by her own thoughts, she quickly stepped back, silently scolding herself for expecting something more. Juan only smiled calmly. His peaceful expression somehow made her even more flustered. He probably thinks I wanted another kiss. Determined not to embarrass herself again, she looked straight at him and forced herself to keep her eyes open. But before she could say anything, Juan leaned toward her once more. This time, he kissed her properly. It was gentle, warm, and completely unexpected. When he finally pulled away, he looked at her with eyes full of kindness, affection, and respect. The tenderness in his gaze made her heart race even faster. Trying to hide his own embarrassment, Juan picked up the bucket of meat. Only then did he realize something. Where's Dorothy? He looked around in confusion. A moment later, he spotted a tiny face peeking through the doorway. Dorothy had been watching everything. The little girl had witnessed the entire scene without making a sound. The moment Ri realized they had an audience, she let out a small cry of embarrassment. Her face burned crimson. Without another word, she covered her cheeks and ran into the house. Juan could only stand there awkwardly, while Dorothy blinked at him innocently, completely unaware of why the adults were acting so strangely. Later that day, the three of them decided to take a walk through the forest. Ri led the way, while Juan followed behind with Dorothy beside him. The quiet path was peaceful, surrounded by tall trees and the gentle sound of birds. Dorothy happily skipped ahead before suddenly stopping. She reached out both hands toward the heavy bucket Juan was carrying. She wanted to help. Juan smiled warmly. Thank you. Instead of smiling back, Dorothy frowned. She puffed out her little cheeks and looked almost offended. Juan stared at her, confused. Then he realized his mistake. He hadn't called her by name. Understanding immediately, he knelt beside her. Thank you, Dorothy. The little girl's face lit up with joy. Simply hearing her name spoken with affection made her happier than anything else. With renewed excitement, she proudly helped push the heavy bucket all the way home. Back inside the cabin, Ri carefully spread the wolf's hide across the floor. Juan watched curiously. To him, it still carried a strong smell. He couldn't understand why anyone would want to keep it inside the house. But as he watched Ri gently run her fingers across the soft fur, he realized it meant far more than a hunting trophy. To her, it represented safety. It reminded her of the day he had protected both her and Dorothy. Seeing how much she treasured it filled Juan with quiet satisfaction. Dorothy sat beside her mother and curiously touched the fur. Then she picked up a smooth little stone from the floor. Pretending it was a comb, she carefully brushed the wolf's fur as though grooming a pet. The innocent gesture made Ri smile. Juan smiled too. Watching the two of them together filled the small cabin with a warmth he had never known before. Not long afterward, Ri stepped outside to prepare dinner. She carefully laid fresh pieces of meat in the open air so they could dry properly. Juan watched every step with great interest. So this is how food is preserved in this world. He memorized everything she did. If he wanted to survive here, he needed to learn these skills himself. He also noticed how pleased Ri looked when she found the animal fat he had saved earlier. Apparently, keeping it had been the right decision. That small success made him smile. Still, he understood how little he actually knew. This world was completely unfamiliar. He didn't know what people valued. He didn't know how trading worked. He didn't even understand which everyday skills were considered essential. If he wanted to protect his new family, he had to learn as quickly as possible. With that thought, he stood up. He had rested long enough. It was time to get back to work. Ri immediately noticed. She hurried over and gently stopped him. Her face was filled with concern. She motioned for him to sit down and continue resting. Juan smiled reassuringly. He slowly shook his head and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm all right." His smile told her that his body had recovered and that she didn't need to worry. Ri hesitated for a moment. Finally, she sighed and nodded. Although she was still worried, she stepped aside and allowed him to go. Juan picked up his axe and walked toward the forest. He wanted to gather more firewood while also becoming familiar with the trees around him. He had heard that oak made excellent firewood, although he still wasn't sure how to recognize one. After searching for a while, he found a tree that looked suitable enough for practice. He tightened his grip on the axe. Taking a deep breath, he swung with all his strength. Thud. The blow was incredibly powerful. Unfortunately, he had used far too much force. The axe slipped from his hands and shot through the air, spinning wildly before disappearing into the trees. Juan froze. Seriously? He stared at the empty space where his axe had been, then covered his face with one hand. "I can't believe I just did that." After several minutes of searching through bushes and fallen leaves, he finally found the axe. Shaking his head, he laughed at his own mistake before getting back to work. By the time the sun began to sink, he had gathered a large pile of firewood. He loaded everything into a heavy basket, lifted it onto his back, and happily made his way home. As soon as he stepped inside the cabin, he noticed that both Ri and Dorothy were waiting for him. The worried expressions on their faces disappeared the moment they saw him. Before Juan could even greet them, Rai hurried over, grabbed his hand, and gently pulled him inside. She sat him down without saying a word. Juan blinked in confusion. Then she carefully took his rough hands into hers. Using a damp cloth, she slowly wiped away the dirt, dust, and sweat that covered them. Juan felt strangely embarrassed. No one had ever cared for him like this before. He wasn't sure how to react. Nearby, Dorothy watched the scene with great interest. Suddenly, her eyes sparkled with excitement. She had an idea. Without warning, she turned around and ran outside. Juan and Ri looked at each other in confusion. A few moments later, Dorothy returned carrying a small container filled with water. It was clearly too heavy for her. Water splashed over the sides with every step, leaving a trail across the floor. Even so, she proudly made it all the way back. Without hesitating, she lifted the container and poured the water straight onto Juan. Splash! Cold water soaked him from head to toe. For a second, Juan simply sat there, in complete silence. Then, he looked at Dorothy's hopeful little face. She had only wanted to help. How could he possibly be angry? A smile spread across his face. Ree couldn't hold back her laughter any longer. The cabin quickly filled with cheerful laughter, replacing the earlier worry. Dorothy tilted her head in confusion. She seemed disappointed, almost as if she had expected a much bigger reaction. Seeing her expression, Juan chuckled softly. He knelt down beside her and gently stroked her head. "Thank you, Dorothy." The little girl's face immediately brightened. Receiving praise from her new father made her happier than anything else. Excited, she spun around, ready to run outside again and bring even more water. Juan quickly stood and stopped her before she flooded the entire house. Ree laughed even harder. Watching the two of them together made her heart feel lighter than it had in years. Only a few days earlier, she had believed happiness was impossible. Now it was right in front of her. More than anything, she wanted to protect these precious moments forever. As evening settled over the forest, thin curls of smoke rose from the cabin's chimney. From a distance, it looked like any ordinary home. Inside, however, a new family was slowly learning how to live together. Dinner was finally ready. Fresh meat filled the table, the result of all their hard work. Dorothy had exhausted herself during the day and had already fallen asleep before the meal began. Juan and Ree quietly ate together. Neither of them felt the need to speak. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. For the first time, they felt comfortable simply sharing each other's company. After dinner, both of them looked toward Dorothy. She was sleeping soundly with her thumb tucked into her mouth. The innocent sight brought gentle smiles to both of their faces. Juan carefully lifted her into his arms. She didn't wake. Her small body rested peacefully against his chest. He carried her to the bed beside the fireplace, where the warm flames filled the room with gentle heat. Slowly, he covered her with a blanket and made sure she was comfortable before quietly stepping away. Meanwhile, Ree remained by the fire, cleaning up after dinner. She carefully washed the dishes, unaware that Juan had walked back inside. Without saying a word, he reached out and gently took her hand. The sudden touch made her freeze. She looked up at him in surprise. Her cheeks turned bright red. Juan himself wasn't entirely sure why he had done it. It felt almost as though his heart had acted before his mind could catch up. Slowly, he pulled her closer. She didn't resist. Instead, she allowed herself to rest against his chest. For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. She could hear the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Somehow, it made her feel safe. Still holding the damp cloth in her hand, Ree reached up shyly and gently wiped the sweat from the back of his neck. It was such a small gesture, yet it carried more affection than words ever could. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought he might hear it. She reminded herself that caring for her husband was simply part of being a wife. Gathering every bit of courage she had, she carefully lifted the edge of his shirt. She wanted to wipe away the sweat on his stomach as well. The moment her fingers brushed his skin, both of them froze. Ree instantly looked away. She was so embarrassed that she could barely breathe. Juan simply smiled. His eyes were warm and gentle. There was no teasing, no impatience, only affection. Even so, the closeness became almost too much for Ree to bear. Noticing her nervousness, Juan gently took her hand again. Their eyes met. The room grew completely still. Outside, only the soft sound of insects could be heard. Leaning closer, Juan whispered softly, "It's time to sleep." Hand in hand, Juan and Ree walked into the cabin's only bedroom. A small lantern filled the room with a soft golden glow. The warm light made the simple wooden room feel peaceful and inviting. Ree's heart was beating so fast that she thought it might burst. She knew what usually happened on a couple's wedding night. The thought immediately brought back painful memories. She remembered her father, his angry face, his cruel voice. She remembered him beating her mother until late into the night. She remembered hearing her mother cry while her father shouted that she would only be hit harder if she didn't stop crying. As a little girl, Ree had hidden in fear, believing that one day she would suffer the same fate. Tonight, she thought that day had finally come. She expected pain. She expected fear. She expected tears. Instead, Juan simply smiled at her. He gently lay down beside her without forcing anything. Dorothy, who had been sleeping peacefully, rested between them. The three of them shared the same bed because the cabin had only one room. For ordinary villagers, this was completely normal. Juan looked at Ree quietly. She really is my wife now, he thought. A gentle smile appeared on his face. Silently, he prayed that nothing would ever separate them. He wished for nothing more than to protect Ree and Dorothy for the rest of his life. With those thoughts in his heart, he slowly closed his eyes. Morning arrived with the gentle crackling of firewood in the fireplace. Ree slowly opened her eyes. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she realized she was lying safely beside Juan. Her head rested comfortably on his arm. On the other side, Dorothy was still sleeping peacefully against him. Ree let out a long sigh of relief. The wedding night she had feared since childhood had never happened. There had been no violence, no shouting, no tears, only warmth, only peace. She quietly moved a little closer to Juan. His steady breathing made her feel safe. Since meeting him, her entire life had changed. The world no longer felt as cold as it once had. Just then, Juan slowly woke up. He blinked for a moment before smiling. Without saying anything, he gently wrapped one arm around Ree and the other around Dorothy. The unexpected embrace made Ree's heart race once again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was happiness. A smile slowly spread across her face. It was a feeling she never wanted to lose. After making sure Dorothy was still asleep, Juan carefully slipped out of bed. He gently brushed the little girl's cheek with the back of his fingers before quietly stepping outside. Fresh morning air greeted him. Ree was already working. She was carrying a heavy bucket filled with water. Before she could lift it any farther, Juan walked over and took it from her hands. She looked up in surprise. His effortless strength continued to amaze her. After setting the bucket down, Juan picked up a wet towel and twisted it dry. Water poured onto the ground as though someone had squeezed it with incredible force. Ree watched with wide eyes. His strength still seemed unbelievable. Juan noticed her staring. He smiled. "Good morning, honey." The word caught her completely by surprise. Honey? Her cheeks instantly turned bright red. She lowered her head. Was it a special title? Or was it an affectionate nickname? Juan scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Maybe he had embarrassed her. After a few moments, Ree looked up shyly. In a barely audible voice, she whispered, "Please keep calling me that." Juan smiled warmly. "Good morning, honey." Ree immediately covered her face with both hands. She was far too embarrassed to look at him. Finding her reaction adorable, Juan gently turned her toward him. "Honey, look at me." Her face only became redder. Just then, Dorothy slowly rubbed her sleepy eyes. She had been dreaming about an enormous roasted chicken leg. Still half asleep, she climbed out of bed. A little trail of drool remained at the corner of her mouth. She took one step, then another, before suddenly losing her balance and falling onto the floor. Juan and Ree hurried toward her at once. "Dorothy." The little girl blinked once before happily wrapping her arms around both of their legs. Apparently, she wasn't hurt at all. She simply wanted a hug. Juan laughed with relief. Ree gently patted Dorothy's head. Moments later, Dorothy noticed the fresh meat stacked inside the cabin. Her sleepy eyes suddenly sparkled. To her, it didn't matter whether the meat came from a wolf, a deer, or any other animal. Meat was meat. She pointed excitedly. Meat. Juan laughed. Yes, meat. Dorothy happily repeated the word over and over while bouncing in place. Meat. Meat. Watching her excitement made both Juan and Ree burst into laughter. Seeing how much she loved food, Juan silently made himself another promise. I'll become the best hunter I can. I'll never let my family go hungry. After breakfast, Juan picked up his sharpened axe. The blade gleamed brightly beneath the morning sun. This time, he walked into the forest with much more confidence. Each day he felt himself becoming stronger. But as he ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere slowly changed. The cheerful sounds of birds disappeared. The air became strangely heavy. Even breathing felt slightly more difficult. Juan instinctively tightened his grip on the axe. His eyes carefully scanned the trees. Something feels wrong. He wondered what kind of monster might appear this time. Then, crunch, the sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Juan spun around immediately, raising his axe. Instead of a wild beast, he found an old man. The stranger wore a heavy hooded cloak that covered most of his body. For a moment he seemed completely unaware of Juan's presence. Then he slowly turned. His face was old and weathered. Deep wrinkles covered his skin. But his eyes remained incredibly sharp. They were as cold as a hunter's knife. Juan remained completely still. Who is this man? And why is he alone this deep inside the forest? The mysterious old man quietly looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. The forest fell completely silent. Only the wind moved through the trees. The old man stood alone in the forest, studying the bloodstains scattered across the ground. He slowly crouched and touched the dried blood with his fingers before examining the surrounding tracks. There are traces of a large beast here, he murmured. The footprints were deep and easy to follow. Whatever creature had been here was enormous. As he walked farther along the trail, his expression gradually changed. He had secretly observed Juan for several days. From what he had seen, the young man barely knew how to use a weapon. His movements were clumsy, and he showed none of the habits of an experienced hunter. Yet the evidence before him told a completely different story. More blood stained the forest floor. The trail continued for quite some distance before ending abruptly. The old man's eyes narrowed. Impossible, even a skilled hunter would struggle to bring down such a massive beast alone. And yet, someone had done exactly that. I need to see him for myself. Without wasting another moment, he followed the trail toward Juan. Back in the present, the two men stood face to face in silence. The old hunter's attention immediately fell on Juan's hands. Several bite marks were clearly visible. He studied them carefully. Those are wolf bites. His mind raced. The wounds should have become infected. The muscles should have been torn apart. Someone injured that badly shouldn't even be able to move normally. Yet Juan stood before him without the slightest sign of pain. The old man's expression slowly changed. There's only one possible explanation. Could he be a mage? Real mages were incredibly rare. Most ordinary people never met one during their entire lives. If Juan truly possessed magical healing, everything could change. A slow smile spread beneath the old man's hood. Not a friendly smile. A hopeful one. He whispered quietly, perhaps this is finally my chance. His eyes filled with a hatred that had been buried for decades. A chance for revenge. Juan, meanwhile, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in his chest. The old man hadn't introduced himself. He simply continued staring. Finally, he began to speak. "I'm an old fool now," he said calmly. "But I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I was young." His eyes drifted toward the distant mountains. "I dreamed of becoming a respected forest keeper. In those days, anyone who managed a noble's forests first had to serve in war. If they earned enough merit, they could become one of the Lord's trusted retainers." A faint smile crossed his weathered face. "I left my father behind. I traveled from village to village. I wanted to become an independent hunter. Eventually, I found work as the keeper of a beautiful mountain. The forests were rich. Game was plentiful. It seemed like the perfect life." His smile slowly disappeared. But there was one problem. There wasn't enough firewood. So the villagers often went deeper into the mountains to gather it. "I thought nothing of it. I believed it was simply part of the job." He lowered his head. "I never asked myself why they never went any farther." His voice became much colder. "That mistake destroyed my life." He clenched both fists beneath his cloak. "I never imagined goblins lived in those mountains." Hatred filled every word he spoke. They kidnapped women. They forced them to bear children. They destroyed families. Only now did Juan understand why the old man's eyes carried so much pain. The villagers already knew. They kept it secret. They let me walk straight into danger. I survived. But everything else was taken from me. Silence filled the forest. The old hunter slowly looked back at Juan. "For decades, I stayed alive for one reason. Revenge." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "I've waited all these years for someone strong enough to finish what I couldn't." Inside his own mind, the old man continued thinking. "This giant possesses unbelievable strength. His body heals faster than any ordinary human. He's exactly what I need." The goblins still hid deep within the mountains. Sooner or later, they would attack the village again. Before that happened, Juan needed to become strong enough to destroy them. But first, he must never discover where the goblin nest is. Not until our agreement is complete. Once he's committed, he won't be able to walk away. Juan politely bowed his head. The old hunter immediately noticed something. Even while bowing, Juan kept most of his weight on his back foot. He hadn't lowered his guard. The old man smiled to himself. "Interesting. He's far more cautious than he appears." Looking directly into Juan's eyes, he finally spoke. "From today onward, I'll teach you everything I know. You'll become a true hunter." Juan blinked in surprise. The offer came completely out of nowhere. He didn't understand why this stranger wanted to help him. Still, learning how to survive in this world was exactly what he needed. Before he could ask another question, the scene shifted to the following morning. Juan slowly opened his eyes. "It feels like I only just fell asleep, and it's already morning." Inside the cabin, Ree and Dorothy were grilling meat over the fire. The smell of breakfast filled the room. Juan quietly got dressed and prepared to leave. As he passed the window, he noticed the hooded old man waiting outside. Juan frowned slightly. I'd rather not invite him inside. When he wasn't home, only Ree and Dorothy remained in the cabin. He had no intention of letting a stranger become comfortable entering their home. Outside, the old man stood patiently with a faint smile. For some reason, the smile looked incredibly suspicious. Juan almost laughed. That expression, it reminds me of an HR manager smiling during salary negotiations. Even so, he could tell the old man was trying, in his own awkward way, to behave politely. Just then, Ree called his name. She had prepared a small lunch for him. Carefully wrapping the food in cloth, she placed it into his hands. "You'll be gone all day. Please make sure you eat." Juan smiled warmly. Watching her prepare a lunch for him filled his heart with a strange happiness. She's acting just like a caring wife. Nearby, Dorothy hurried toward the door. She didn't want him to leave without saying goodbye. Ri looked at him with worried eyes. Please, come back safely. Juan nodded. I will. Dorothy quickly hugged his leg. Papa, come back safely too. Juan gently patted her head. I promise. Watching the smiles on both their faces, he felt a warmth he had never known before. Having people waiting for me, it really is wonderful. The old hunter led him deep into the mountains. They walked for a very long time. Eventually, Juan couldn't help asking himself, what exactly is he trying to show me? Finally, the old man stopped. Without saying much, he pointed toward the ground. Juan looked down in confusion. The old hunter demonstrated something with his boots, leaving fresh marks in the soil. Juan carefully compared them with the older tracks already on the ground. His eyes widened slightly. The footprints, they're different. The old hunter nodded. For the first time, Juan realized that the forest itself could tell stories. And that was where his true training as a hunter would begin. Juan watched the old man very closely. He stared at every step the old man took. Is that a special way of walking? Juan wondered in amazement. Is it a heavy stomp or a magic step? Whatever it is, I need to learn it. I must copy his exact movements. With that thought in mind, Juan started to imitate the old man right away. Step by step, he copied him as carefully as he could. The old man just kept walking calmly. Sometimes, he glanced back to check on Juan's progress as they moved deeper into the dark mountains. Later, Juan realized the old man was teaching him the secret mountain paths. The training was much harder than Juan expected. The old man made Juan touch the bark of different trees. This helped Juan feel the unique shape and atmosphere of every mountain slope. Sometimes, the old man made him stand completely still. Juan had to feel the ground under his feet over and over again. He did this until he completely memorized the terrain. The training was tough and repetitive. But slowly, Juan began to truly understand the mountains. After a long time, they finally stopped to rest. Juan sat down on a rock, breathing heavily. The old man quietly opened his bag. Juan's eyes lit up immediately. I finally get to eat the lunch Rigi worked so hard to make, he thought excitedly. He quickly opened his own bag and pulled out the lunchbox. A delicious smell filled the air. Juan smiled brightly. It smells amazing, he said happily. But the old man suddenly looked very serious. Do not open your lunch here, he ordered in his strange language. Juan looked at him in total confusion. The old man explained, cooked human food smells very different from the wild mountains. If that smell spreads, dangerous beasts will come straight for us. Hearing this, Juan quickly closed the box. He held it carefully in his big hands. A sad, bitter smile appeared on his face. Rigi woke up so early to make this for me, he whispered. I really hope this won't be the first and last time I get to eat it. Juan sat there quietly, holding the box tightly. His heart felt heavy with love and sadness. I feel like I am going to cry, he muttered softly. Soon the old man led Juan to a hidden cabin deep in the woods. The place was very simple and completely isolated. Juan looked around with curious eyes. So, this is where you live? He asked softly. The old man did not answer. Instead, he went inside and came back holding some weapons. Juan stared at one of the bows in confusion. That bow looks very strange, he thought. The bows from my world look completely different. How do you even shoot that? The design was huge and intimidating. The old man handed the massive bow to Juan. Take this and follow me, he said calmly. As soon as Juan grabbed it, his arm dropped from the heavy weight. His eyes went wide. Can I really use this? He worried. It takes so much strength just to lift it. Meanwhile, the old man held his own heavy bow with perfect ease. Juan watched in absolute amazement. He moved so smoothly, Juan thought. It looks like time has stopped. He uses no extra force at all. The old man's motions were perfectly natural. The bow looked like a part of his own body. Then, the old man let go of the string. The arrow flew at terrifying speed. It hit the dead center of the target perfectly. Huan was speechless. His eyes were full of shock and deep respect. He slowly gripped his own bow. He tried hard to copy the old man's exact posture. As Huan aimed, the old man stepped close. He gently corrected Huan's stance. The old man was completely steady. His hands did not shake at all. How is he not shaking? Huan wondered. Huan was struggling just to hold the bow up. He gripped the wood tighter and focused his mind. I must focus, he told himself seriously. I have to remember the new words and the hunter's movements. I need to train harder. I want to be a good man who can provide for my wife and daughter. His determination grew fiercely. Every lesson mattered now. It was not just for his survival. It was for his new family waiting at home. Back at the small house, Rigi and little Dorothy sat together by the warm fireplace. Dorothy was full of food and very happy. She sang a cute little song. The sky is blue. The snow is white. Rigi's hair is shiny. Huan's hair is black. And the meat makes my tummy happy by the fire. She sang in a sweet, innocent voice. After her song, Dorothy stood up and held her round belly. I am so full, she smiled. My tummy is swelling up with meat. Rigi laughed softly at Dorothy's funny words. Dorothy looked up and saw Rigi's beautiful smile. She smiles so much more now that Huan is here, Dorothy thought. Before him, we never smiled. Seeing Rigi so happy made Dorothy feel warm inside. Her laugh feels like the warm fire, she thought. I hope my food digests fast so I can eat more meat. But then, Dorothy grew quiet. A dark feeling of uncertainty entered her small heart. She thought deeply about Huan. Who exactly is Huan? She wondered. Rigi says he is her husband. But what is he to me? Her innocent thoughts turned into sad anxiety. Huan and Rigi are not my real parents. Will they leave me behind, just like my real dad did? Will Huan only take Rigi away? Dorothy looked down at the floor. Painful thoughts filled her tiny heart. The warm fire still burned. But she felt cold. What will happen to me? She worried. Later, Dorothy woke up from a short nap. She opened her eyes and looked around the quiet room. Where did everyone go? She whispered. Suddenly, a terrible memory flashed in her mind. It was a nightmare from her past. She remembered a cruel voice yelling at her. You useless girl. If you were a boy, you could work. But all you do is eat my food. It was a painful memory that still haunted her. Dorothy shook her head hard to make the bad thoughts go away. She quickly looked at the kitchen table. The meat is safe, she sighed in relief. But then, she panicked again. Where is Rigi? Suddenly, angry shouting came from outside. Don't you dare lie to me. The scary voice made Dorothy freeze. She trembled and peeked out the window. Her face turned pale white. I know those bad men, she thought in absolute terror. They used to come beat up my dad for money. Bad memories flooded her mind. After those men left, her dad would beat her and her foster mother. Dorothy shook with fear. She looked at Rigi out in the yard. Is she going to be okay? Dorothy cried silently. Will they beat her half to death? 2. Outside, a cruel man with yellow hair grabbed Rigi tightly by her hair. Answer me, he screamed. What is that smell? You stole our meat, didn't you? Rigi shook her head, ignoring the sharp pain. No, I did not steal it. My husband hunted it, she cried. The yellow-haired man yelled in her face. What a lie. You think hunting is easy? A man with red hair spoke up coldly. Let's check inside the cabin. Let's see what she is hiding. Rigi panicked. No, please. My husband really hunted it. I am not lying. She begged desperately. The bad men did not care. They threw Riji roughly onto the hard dirt. Then, they forcefully entered the house. As soon as they stepped inside, their greedy eyes saw the giant wolf skin. It is huge. The yellow-haired man gasped in shock, his face filled with greed. We can sell this for so much money. We struck gold. He turned to the other men. Search the whole place. Do not miss anything. One man looked around and shouted happily, "Hey, I found fresh meat." Under the bed, little Dorothy hid in the dark. She was shaking uncontrollably, trying not to make a single sound. One of the men looked at the wolf skin again. Did that giant bastard actually hunt a wolf? He whispered in disbelief. Right at that exact moment, Riji rushed into the house. She screamed desperately at them. "No. Do not touch that. That belongs to us.